10 times black pastors got caught using church funds for luxury. Money, faith, and betrayal. 3 explosive forces collide in scandals that shook entire congregations. Imagine pastors flying in multi-million-dollar jets, driving Rolls-Royces, or wearing diamond-studded watches, all funded by church donations. From Nigeria to the United States, spiritual leaders who once preached sacrifice were exposed for chasing luxury instead. These stories will shock you, anger you, and make you question the true cost of blind trust. Are pastors entitled to enjoy wealth, or have they crossed the line into greed? Stay with us until the end. You won't believe the final case only here on Legends of Black Excellence. Ayo Oritsejafor. Few pastors in Africa ever rose as high or fell as hard as Ayo Joseph Oritsejafor Word of Life Bible Church in 1987 in Warri, Delta State. Over the years, his ministry grew into a global network with more than 70 branches and an estimated 30,000 weekly worshipers, making him one of the continent's most recognized Pentecostal leaders. His influence spread so far that in 2007, he became president of the Pentecostal Fellowship of Nigeria. PFN first Pentecostal pastor to lead the Christian Association of Nigeria, CAN. But Oritsejafor's fame didn't come from sermons alone. It came from the lifestyle he built around the church. Known for flying around the world in private jets and driving luxury vehicles, he once shocked the nation when he acquired a Bombardier Challenger 601 jet, valued at over $3.5 million. For his supporters, this was evidence that God blesses his chosen servants with abundance. For critics, it was a glaring symbol of excess in a country where millions struggle daily. The turning point came in 2014 when South African authorities seized $9.3 million flown in on his private jet. The money, said to be intended for the purchase of arms to combat insurgency in Nigeria, instantly drew suspicion. Though Oritsejafor admitted the plane was his, he distanced himself from the operation, claiming he had leased it out and that a war against the church was underway. Still, the association of a pastor's jet with an arms smuggling scandal stained his reputation permanently. Beyond the jet controversy, Papa Ayo was often seen mingling with Nigeria's political elite, sometimes even more comfortably than with ordinary believers. He enjoyed warm relations with presidents and business tycoons, further fueling the idea that his ministry was as much about power and wealth as it was about faith. Many Nigerians questioned how a man of God who preached humility could accumulate such extravagant riches, from palatial estates in Lagos and Delta State to a fleet of expensive cars. At the heart of the criticism was a painful irony. While Oritsejafor urged congregants to remain steadfast in their faith, many saw him living in a reality far removed from the struggles of average Nigerians. The scandal not only shook his image, but also reinforced a growing skepticism toward prosperity-preaching pastors who equate divine favor with personal wealth. Though Oritsejafor continues to defend his ministry and remains active in Christian leadership, the shadow of the 2014 jet scandal still lingers. His story serves as both a warning and a case study of how spiritual authority can be overshadowed by financial controversy. For many, the saga of Papa Ayo remains one of the most dramatic examples of a pastor caught up in the glitter of luxury at the expense of trust. Kirby John Caldwell. When Kirby John H. Caldwell stepped onto the national stage, few could have predicted how his journey would end. Born in 1953 in Houston, Texas, Caldwell built a reputation as a visionary pastor who merged spiritual leadership with social and economic development. He graduated from Carleton College, earned a Master of Divinity from Perkins School of Theology in 1981, and went on to transform Windsor Village United Methodist Church into one of the largest United Methodist congregations in the United States, serving more than 14,000 members. Caldwell was not just a preacher, he was a community builder. He spearheaded the creation of affordable housing projects, educational programs, and business initiatives that revitalized parts of Houston. His work earned him a seat at the table with the most powerful figures in America. He became a spiritual advisor to Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama, even offering prayers at national events and providing guidance during times of crisis. For many, he embodied the idea that faith leaders could bridge the gap between the church and the halls of political power. But beneath the accomplishments lay a darker reality. In 2018, federal prosecutors revealed that Caldwell, along with financial planner Gregory Allen Smith, was at the center of a $3.5 million investment fraud scheme. The pair persuaded investors, many of them retirees, to purchase so-called historic Chinese bonds. These century-old bonds had long been considered worthless and not recognized by China's government or any legitimate financial institutions. Still, Caldwell used his pastoral influence to assure victims the investments were safe and promised extraordinary returns. The truth was devastating. Instead of generating wealth for investors, the funds were diverted into Caldwell's personal accounts to pay down mortgages, credit card balances, and loans. For a man trusted by presidents and communities alike, the betrayal hit particularly hard. By March 2020, Caldwell pleaded guilty to wire fraud and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. He was also ordered to pay back the millions siphoned from victims who had believed in his integrity. This fall from grace sent shockwaves across both the church and political spheres. How could a man who stood beside U.S. presidents and preached about righteousness exploit the very people who trusted him most? It raised pressing questions about how much unchecked power and credibility pastors wield in their congregations. Would you trust a pastor who mixes spiritual leadership with financial investments, or should those roles always remain separate? Caldwell's story remains one of the most striking cautionary tales among black clergy. From the pulpit to the Oval Office, his trajectory was extraordinary. Yet the scandal underscored how influence, when mixed with greed, can erode decades of goodwill in an instant. While he once inspired thousands with messages of hope and empowerment, his legacy now stands as a warning of what happens when faith leaders cross the line between guiding souls and chasing fortunes. Orlando Franklin. The story of Pastor Orlando Franklin is less about international influence and more about the deep fractures that can tear apart a church from within. Franklin rose to leadership at the New Galilean Church in Jackson, Mississippi, after the death of the former pastor. Initially, he was welcomed with trust. The congregation, eager for continuity, gave him 147 votes to secure his role as spiritual shepherd. At first, many believed he could guide them into a new era of unity and growth. But almost immediately, cracks began to appear in his leadership style. Members accused him of being authoritarian, dismissing their concerns and centralizing power in ways that alienated the very people he was supposed to serve. Allegations soon mounted that Franklin was spending church money recklessly without accountability. Funds that were meant to support ministries and community needs seemed to vanish into projects and expenses that only he controlled. By 2015, frustration boiled over. A fresh election was organized, and this time the numbers told a very different story. More than 400 congregants voted to terminate his tenure, dwarfing the original support he had once enjoyed. To make their intentions clear, over 300 members signed a formal petition demanding his removal. Instead of a smooth transition, however, the church descended into chaos. Franklin still had loyal supporters among certain deacons and members who physically blocked the entrance to the church, refusing to let the wider congregation reclaim control. Accounts from churchgoers painted a troubling picture. Microphones being shut off mid-service to silence dissent letters being sent to members, barring them from participating in activities, and accusations that Franklin used manipulation and intimidation to maintain control. One member described him bluntly as money-hungry and cunning. For many, the issue wasn't simply financial mismanagement. It was the sense that their house of worship had been transformed into a personal kingdom. The turmoil at New Galilean Church revealed just how fragile trust can be when financial transparency disappears. Unlike some global televangelists with jets and mansions, Franklin's scandal was local, raw, and immediate. It didn't involve millions of dollars, but it left scars on a community that had once been united by faith. Families were divided, friendships strained, and the sanctity of Sunday service was replaced by bitter disputes at the church door. In the end, Franklin's legacy became a cautionary tale for smaller congregations everywhere. It showed that financial mismanagement doesn't only happen in megachurches, it can devastate local communities just as easily. The saga also underscored the importance of accountability, open communication, and humility in pastoral leadership. For those who witnessed the conflict firsthand, the memory of locked doors, heated confrontations, and unanswered questions about money still lingers as a reminder of what can happen when trust is broken at the very heart of the church. Juanita Bynum. In the early 2000s, Juanita Bynum was celebrated as one of the most powerful women in American televangelism. Hailed by the New York Times as the most prominent black female evangelist on television, she broke barriers in a field often dominated by men. Her sermons, music, and books spoke to a generation of women seeking empowerment and spiritual renewal. Her album, Piece of My Passion, even reached No. 55 on the Billboard 200 in 2006, a rare achievement for a preacher. But success in ministry came hand in hand with headlines about luxury and questionable financial dealings. Bynum built a brand around prosperity, and her teachings often urged followers to give generously with the promise of divine blessings. In 2020, she raised eyebrows by selling a $130 prayer kit, which included oil, a prayer shawl, and other symbolic items. At a time when families were struggling through the pandemic, many saw it as opportunistic. Social media backlash was fierce, with critics accusing her of disguising fundraising under the cloak of spirituality. Yet the bigger scandal came in 2024 when two non-profit organizations tied to Bynum's ministry were investigated for missing funds. Reports revealed that about $1.7 million was unaccounted for, raising concerns about how donations were managed. While no formal charges were publicized against Bynum herself, the discovery fueled widespread criticism that she was enriching her personal lifestyle under the banner of ministry. This was not an isolated incident in her career. For years, Bynum's name had been linked to extravagance. From lavish weddings costing tens of thousands of dollars to high-end wardrobes fit for a celebrity, her lifestyle often mirrored that of the very prosperity gospel preachers she had once criticized. Supporters defended her, claiming she was simply reaping the rewards of hard work, while detractors saw hypocrisy, a preacher profiting from the pockets of ordinary believers. Despite the controversies, Juanita Bynum has remained a commanding presence. She continues to host conferences, release music, and write books, never shying away from the spotlight. Her resilience has kept her ministry afloat, even when public opinion turned sharply against her. But her story highlights the recurring question haunting modern megachurches: where is the line between legitimate fundraising and exploitation? For many, Bynum represents the dangers of commercializing faith. Her ministry once inspired millions, yet her legacy is complicated by the perception that spiritual gifts were marketed as products and donations intended for God's work disappeared without explanation. The combination of influence, wealth, and unchecked accountability turned what could have been a lasting legacy of empowerment into a case study of excess. Juanita Bynum's journey stands as both a testament to the heights a woman in ministry can achieve and a warning of how easily that influence can be undermined by the lure of money and luxury. Shepherd Bushiri. Few names in African Pentecostalism command as much attention as Shepherd Bushiri, also called Major One. Born in 1983 in Mzuzu, Malawi, he rose from humble beginnings to become one of the continent's most controversial preachers. As the founder of the Enlightened Christian Gathering ECG, also known as the Jesus Nation Church, Bushiri built a ministry empire stretching across Africa, particularly in South Africa, where his services filled stadiums and drew global audiences online. But alongside his sermons and claimed miracles came a reputation for extreme wealth. Bushiri cultivated the image of a spiritual entrepreneur. His company, Shepherd Bushiri Investments, was involved in mining real estate and financial ventures, although critics often labeled these as fronts for questionable schemes. By the mid-2010s, Bushiri was counted among the richest pastors in Africa, with a lifestyle that rivaled celebrities. Multiple private jets, luxury mansions, and a garage boasting a Rolls-Royce Ghost Maserati Aston Martin and Mercedes G63 AMG. His rise, however, was constantly dogged by accusations. In February 2019, Bushiri and his wife Mary were arrested in South Africa on charges of fraud, money laundering, and contravening exchange control regulations. Prosecutors alleged that they orchestrated an investment scam involving millions of rands, promising congregants high returns only to funnel the money into personal accounts. Although granted bail, the couple fled to Malawi later that year, claiming their lives were in danger. Many observers believed the escape was simply an attempt to evade justice and asset seizures. Beyond the courtroom, Bushiri's ministry faced criticism for turning faith into a business. Reports surfaced of congregants being pressured to invest in dubious kingdom projects, buy expensive tickets to his dinners, or pay large sums for one-on-one prayers. In 2017, he allegedly launched investment schemes within the church itself, extracting significant sums from devoted members. While he justified these ventures as ways to empower Christians financially, many saw them as a cycle of exploitation. Perhaps even more damaging were the whispers of staged miracles. Videos circulated of healings that skeptics claimed were pre-arranged, fueling the perception that Bushiri's charisma masked manipulation. Despite the controversies, his popularity persisted, with followers calling him Major One and attributing supernatural powers to his ministry. As of recent years, Bushiri remains based in Malawi, where he continues to preach and maintain influence. Yet his legal battles in South Africa remain unresolved, with prosecutors still seeking extradition. The saga has left a deep divide. To some, he is a prophet anointed by God to demonstrate wealth as a sign of blessing. To others, he is the ultimate symbol of how religion can be twisted into a business empire. In the end, Shepherd Bushiri's story illustrates the dangerous intersection of faith money and unchecked power. His legacy will always be debated. Was he a spiritual pioneer, misunderstood by critics, or a master manipulator who built a kingdom of wealth at the expense of the faithful? Enoch Adeboye. Among Nigeria's most recognizable spiritual leaders, Pastor Enoch Adejare Adeboye stands at the top. Known simply as Daddy G.O., he has led the Redeemed Christian Church of God, RCCG, since 1981, transforming it from a relatively small local body into one of the world's largest Pentecostal networks, with tens of thousands of branches across more than 190 nations. Adeboye is admired for his discipline, his quiet authority, and his ability to mobilize millions during RCCG's Holy Ghost Congress events at the church's massive redemption camp near Lagos. Yet with prominence comes scrutiny. Adeboye has often preached about spiritual humility and warned his congregants against chasing worldly riches. In August 2025, during one of RCCG's annual conventions, he told the audience to focus on preparing their souls for heaven rather than pampering their earthly bodies. His words were pointed: God does not hate enjoyment, but the body you pamper and shine will perish. Care for the spirit, that is what goes to heaven. But soon after, social media platforms like X, Twitter, and TikTok exploded with posts highlighting what many saw as a glaring contradiction. Photos of Adeboye's private jet luxury cars and mansions in Nigeria and abroad circulated widely, accompanied by biting commentary. Youths criticized him for discouraging the pursuit of wealth while enjoying the highest comforts himself. For critics, the message was simple. How can a pastor who lives in opulence tell followers to embrace simplicity? This was not the first time Adeboye's wealth had come under question. Reports have long alleged that the RCCG leadership owns several high-value assets, including a Gulfstream private jet and estates valued in millions of dollars. Supporters argue that these are tools to advance the gospel. Jets allow him to preach globally, properties house ministries, but skeptics see them as symbols of a prosperity gospel creeping into the church. The debate surrounding Adeboye is particularly sharp because of his status. Unlike some other controversial pastors, he has maintained an image of personal holiness and has not been tied to direct corruption scandals. Instead, the criticism lies in the contrast between his teachings and his lifestyle. For many Nigerians who struggle with poverty and unemployment, seeing a revered man of God travel in luxury feels like a betrayal of the church's mission. Even in the face of criticism, Adeboye's influence remains vast. He continues to advise presidents, shape political conversations, and command the loyalty of millions of members worldwide. For some, he is the spiritual father of the nation. For others, he is a symbol of the growing commercialization of faith. Ultimately, Pastor E.A. Adeboye's story reflects the tension within modern Pentecostalism, the pursuit of global expansion and influence, funded by offerings from ordinary believers, set against the gospel's call to humility and sacrifice. Whether revered or questioned, his legacy will remain central to the conversation about wealth, faith, and responsibility in the African church. Eddie Long. For decades, Bishop Eddie Lee Long was one of the most recognizable pastors in the United States. As senior pastor of New Birth Missionary Baptist Church in Lithonia, Georgia, he transformed a small congregation of a few hundred into a megachurch of more than 25,000 members at its peak. His fiery sermons, charismatic leadership, and willingness to embrace contemporary worship styles made him a household name in American Christianity. But Bishop Long was also known for his flamboyant persona. While many preachers dressed in modest suits, he stepped onto the pulpit in tailored outfits, designer jewelry, and luxury watches. He was unapologetic about his prosperity, often justifying it as a sign of God's blessing. Behind the scenes, however, critics alleged that Long had blurred the line between church resources and personal indulgence. In 2007, Long was among several televangelists, including Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, Joyce Meyer, and Benny Hinn, investigated by the U.S. Senate Finance Committee over lavish spending and lack of financial transparency. Long refused to disclose his full salary or financial practices, leading to suspicions about how much of New Birth's millions in tithes were funding his lifestyle. Though the committee ultimately found no definitive wrongdoing, the refusal to cooperate left a stain on his reputation. The bigger scandal erupted in 2010 when 5 young men who had once been under Long's mentorship filed lawsuits accusing him of sexual misconduct. They alleged that Long used church funds to buy them luxury gifts cars and trips, grooming them under the guise of spiritual guidance. The lawsuits claimed he used scripture to justify inappropriate relationships and that New Birth's offerings were funneled into maintaining these secret arrangements. Though Long denied the allegations and called himself a man of God under attack, the case never went to trial. Instead, in 2011, he reached a confidential settlement reportedly worth millions of dollars. For many, this settlement reinforced the belief that church money had been used not only to fund his luxury lifestyle, but also to cover the fallout of personal scandal. The combination of flashy living and unresolved allegations devastated Long's image. Membership at New Birth declined sharply, and donations dropped as the controversies mounted. Yet his most loyal supporters continued to defend him, saying he had been targeted because of his prominence and success in uplifting the black church. Eddie Long passed away in 2017 at the age of 63, reportedly from cancer. His death closed a chapter on one of the most controversial ministries in modern church history. To some, he will be remembered as a visionary who built one of the largest black churches in America. To others, his legacy is a cautionary tale of unchecked power, luxury spending, and allegations that forever clouded his ministry. David E. Taylor. When people think of spiritual leaders, they often imagine humility, sacrifice, and devotion. But Pastor David E. Taylor, head of Joshua Media Ministries International (JMMI), became known for the exact opposite: his obsession with luxury. His ministry, based in Missouri, projected itself as a global movement of healing and deliverance. Taylor claimed to perform extraordinary miracles, raising the dead, healing the blind, and even dismantling human trafficking rings. But when investigators began looking into JMMI's finances, a very different story emerged. In 2015, Taylor was grilled during a deposition about his ministry's spending habits, and the answers shocked many. Records showed that church offerings were being used to fund a staggering lifestyle. He owned a fleet of high-end cars, Bentleys, BMWs, Range Rovers, and Mercedes-Benz vehicles, and even spent $50,000 converting one car into a limousine. When asked why a ministry needed a limo, Taylor's answer was vague, claiming it was for special guests. The spending didn't stop at vehicles. Taylor was also confronted about his wardrobe, which featured designer labels like Versace and Louis Vuitton. When asked why church funds were being used for such expensive clothing, he offered a now infamous defense: he needed high-quality clothes because he sweated during television appearances. Critics pounced on the comment, saying it revealed just how casually sacred funds were being redirected into his personal image. Meanwhile, Taylor's claims of supernatural power became a convenient distraction from financial accountability. Members were encouraged to give generously to the ministry with promises of miraculous breakthroughs in return. But as former insiders later testified, offerings were frequently funneled into maintaining Taylor's taste for mansions, designer furniture, and travel. Organizations like Ministry Watch gave JMMI an F rating for financial transparency, underscoring the concerns of watchdogs who said the church functioned more like a personal business than a house of worship. Former members even alleged that Taylor used cult-like tactics to maintain control, silencing dissenters, and ensuring loyalty through fear of spiritual consequences. Do you believe miracles can justify a pastor's luxury spending? Or should every cent of church donations be strictly accounted for? The contrast between Taylor's extravagant lifestyle and the struggles of many of his followers could not have been more glaring. While congregants sacrificed to fund the ministry, their leader lived like a celebrity. Unlike some prosperity preachers who tried to justify their wealth as blessings from God, Taylor often sidestepped accountability, entirely giving evasive answers whenever pressed about money. Creflo Dollar. When it comes to luxury in the pulpit, few names spark as much debate as Creflo Augustus Dollar Jr. Born in 1962, Dollar founded World Changers Church International in College Park, Georgia in the late 1980s. What began with a handful of followers quickly expanded into a megachurch of more than 30,000 members, cementing Dollar's status as one of the most prominent prosperity preachers in America. His ministry grew into a multi-million-dollar empire with affiliates, TV programs, and an international reach. Dollar became infamous not only for his sermons about faith and prosperity, but also for his lifestyle that mirrored the message. He often arrived at services in luxury cars, lived in sprawling mansions, including a $2.5 million home in Atlanta and another residence in New Jersey, and was known for wearing designer suits that signaled success as much as spirituality. The most explosive scandal came in 2015 when Pastor Dollar publicly asked his congregation to help fund a $65 million Gulfstream G650 private jet. He claimed the jet was necessary to spread the gospel worldwide because commercial airlines don't fit God's schedule. Critics, however, saw it as an outrageous abuse of trust and a blatant attempt to turn offerings into personal luxury. Although the campaign was later downplayed by his ministry, the request left a lasting mark on his reputation. Beyond the jet, Dollar's church finances have long been shrouded in controversy. Investigators and watchdog groups questioned whether his teachings, often centered on sowing seeds of money into the church to reap blessings, encouraged blind giving that primarily benefited the pastor himself. Reports of multiple Rolls-Royces, expensive properties, and extravagant spending became synonymous with his name. Supporters argue that Dollar is simply living proof of the prosperity gospel: God rewards faith with material abundance. But critics see a darker picture: offerings intended to support communities' missions, and the poor being diverted to sustain one man's luxury lifestyle. His refusal to disclose full financial details to authorities has only fueled suspicion. Despite the backlash, Creflo Dollar has remained a powerful voice in certain evangelical circles. His ministry continues to operate, and loyal followers defend him as a man under attack for preaching an unpopular truth about God's blessings. Yet for many outsiders, his name has become shorthand for excess in the modern church. The image of a pastor asking working-class congregants to help him fly in one of the world's most expensive private jets continues to resonate as an example of how prosperity theology can go too far. Whether seen as a bold man of faith or a manipulator of hope, Creflo Dollar's legacy is inseparable from the jet, the mansions, and the dollars that flowed from pews into his pockets. Lamor Whitehead. If there was ever a preacher who embraced the spotlight for his style as much as his sermons, it was Bishop Lamor Miller Whitehead. Born in 1978, Whitehead rose to prominence in Brooklyn, New York, where he founded the Leaders of Tomorrow International Churches in 2014. His ministry was based in Canarsie, a working-class neighborhood, but the pastor himself lived a life that looked more like a hip-hop mogul than a community preacher. Nicknamed Pastor Bling Bling Whitehead was instantly recognizable for his bold display of wealth. He often appeared in church draped in custom-made designer suits, diamond-encrusted watches, and chains worth thousands of dollars. His love for luxury extended to cars with a Rolls-Royce Phantom frequently parked outside the modest church, and to real estate where he purchased a 9,000-square-foot mansion in Paramus, New Jersey, featuring 6 bedrooms and 7 bathrooms. By 2021, he had expanded his property portfolio to include homes in Hartford, Connecticut. But with the flash came controversy. Whitehead was no stranger to the law. In 2006, he was arrested and later convicted of identity theft and fraud involving over 50 victims, serving 5 years in prison. After his release, he rebranded himself as a man of God, but old habits appeared to resurface. In 2021, a congregant named Pauline Anderson accused him of convincing her to hand over $90,000, claiming he would help her buy and renovate a home. Instead, she said, Whitehead pocketed the money for himself, later dismissing it as a donation. Whitehead's close ties to politicians also drew attention. He maintained a public friendship with Eric Adams, then Brooklyn Borough President and later Mayor of New York City. Their association raised eyebrows as Whitehead's legal troubles escalated, with many questioning why such a controversial pastor enjoyed political access. In December 2022, his glamorous persona unraveled dramatically. Whitehead was arrested on federal charges of wire fraud, attempted extortion, and lying to the FBI. Prosecutors said he defrauded parishioners, pressured businessmen for money, and lived off funds that were meant for others. In 2023, a Manhattan jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. The fall of Lamor Whitehead is a stark example of what happens when faith and greed collide. While many pastors accused of excess try to defend their actions as part of prosperity theology, Whitehead leaned fully into his brand of luxury, even as his congregation struggled in one of New York's less affluent boroughs. For critics, his story confirms the worst fears about exploitation in modern ministry. To this day, Bishop Lamor Whitehead remains a cautionary tale, a pastor who wore his wealth on his sleeve literally, only to find that the law and public opinion were less forgiving than his congregation once had been. When the dust settles, one question remains. Are these stories about greed or about broken systems that allow unchecked power? From private jets to million-dollar scams, these pastors remind us how faith can be twisted when wealth takes center stage. Some defend prosperity preaching as proof of God's blessing, while others see it as a betrayal of trust. The line between spiritual leadership and self-indulgence has never been thinner. What do you think are these pastors victims of misunderstanding or clear examples of corruption? Let us know in the comments below here on Legends of Black Excellence.